So today, gives me a lot of pleasure to talk with Daniel Kim, the Commissioner to Korea for Trade and Investment Queensland. Daniel's based in Seoul, although him and I have met on previous occasions here in Brisbane where I'm located. And we're going to talk about the renewable opportunities and Korea's interest in the Queensland market, in Australia in the general sense. So thank you, Daniel. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure, Rob. It's great to be with you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Where do you think the underlying appetite comes from? What's the driver for that interest in the Australian and Queensland market, and international market, in fact?
Yeah, Rob. Well, I mean, arguably Korea has lagged behind other countries in terms of its renewables deployment until now. But there are a number of key drivers which I think will really help Korea catch up, over the next decade. And the first one are just the targets which have been announced. So actually very recently, the Korean government announced plans to move to a net zero society by 2050. And that's on top of their previously announced plans to increase the share of renewables in their energy mix from only 6% in 2017 to 20% by 2030. One of the other big drivers, and this is a phenomenon which is happening globally, is ESG, and so Korean capital is increasingly growing a conscience. And I can think of 5 institutional investors that in recent times have come out and announced an end to their coal-related investments and an intention to increase their exposure to low-carbon investments. And these 5 institutional investors that I can think of, they have a combined total of assets under management of close to $95 billion US, so very significant players. One of the third drivers, of course, is just the declining costs. So lower renewable energy costs will help Korea displace fossil fuels with cleaner power while maintaining stable end user power prices. I note that Wood Mackenzie anticipate that by 2030, new utility scale solar and onshore wind will be 20% cheaper than coal-fired power. I also note that they expect offshore wind and distributed solar will both be cheaper than gas-fired power. One of the other key drivers is Korea's hydrogen economy roadmap, which was announced early last year. You're probably aware, Rob, that it articulates some very ambitious targets by 2040, including the manufacture of 6.2 million fuel cell electric vehicles. It also announces a target of 1,200 refueling stations to be built. And it forecasts Korea's demand for hydrogen to be north of 5.2 million tonnes by 2040, of which 1.2 million tonnes they acknowledge needs to be imported. And herein lies the great opportunity for Australia. The final driver is the Green New Deal. So in July this year, and in response to the pandemic, the Korean government announced a Korean New Deal, which with plans to invest 135 billion, or close to 8% of GDP, to create just under 2 million jobs by 2025, based on 2 main policies, including the Digital New Deal and also the Green New Deal. Now, the Green New Deal has allocated $62 billion in new investment across a number of key areas, including the green transition of infrastructure. So that's schools, public housing. It also has a focus on low carbon and decentralized energy. And I note that it includes feasibility studies for 15 regions to find sites potentially for large scale offshore wind. It also includes a focus on innovation in the green industry, including the likes of smart microgrids.
So on that note, where do you think Australia and Queensland in particular, can capitalise on that investment and interest in renewables from Korea?
Yes, well, I mean, Rob, there's certainly, there's no doubt that Korea's green energy transition will create new exciting opportunities for collaboration, between Australia and Korea. And I think it's important, to understand how Korea's role on these renewable energy projects, continues to, evolve and expand. So of course, Korea's always been a great strategic partner to Australia. But when it comes to renewables, again, what we've seen is, some of the Korean strategics, and in particular the Gencos, we've seen their increasing appetite to take on more risk and invest a little bit earlier stage on our renewable energy projects. I mean, the Korean Gencos are also very interested in the O&M role down the track in order to really sort of build the skills of their employees as they look to, really kind of reinvent themselves back home here in Korea. I mean, there's an ever increasing pool of Korean financial investors that are interested in renewables, and that's everything from the securities firms here to the asset managers to the pension funds and the insurance companies. So understanding kind of how they invest is actually going to be really important.
Yes.
But really, what we've seen is, that Korean consortium investment model, which has actually served Korea so well in the past, we see that continuing to be a preferred way for the Koreans to invest in our renewables sector, albeit that, again, the makeup of that consortium, again, is actually it's an interesting and an evolving mix of players. Of course, with Korea, there's also the angle around key equipment supply. So, whether that be solar panels, like Hana Q-cell, whether it be batteries, whether it be even wind turbines. I mean, Korea's got capability, across the board. And to the extent that, Australia looks to kind of leverage that opportunity out of Korea, then brings into play potential a broader funding solution out of Korea, namely the Export Credit Agency funding, through KEXIM and K-SURE. But for me, what will be really interesting to see is Korea's preparedness to come in earlier stage, even earlier than Kolumbula, and perhaps invest and get involved in greenfield projects and take on development risk. What's really interesting is that Korea's Elexseed is partnering with one of the Korean Gencos on the Kumbarilla Renewable Energy Park, located in the Western Downs region of Council. They've recently received their DA, and they're well on their way. And it's very exciting, and it's potentially a game changer when it comes to the corridor between Australia and Korea, and in the area of renewables. When it comes to hydrogen, that there are multiple ways for Australia and Korea to collaborate going forward across the hydrogen value chain. So look, for me, there's actually never been a better time than now to take a first or a fresh look at some of these evolving and new emerging opportunities between Australia and Korea.